My name is Mark Moraski. I'm the audio director at Tripwire Interactive in Georgia. I've been doing game audio for over a decade now. I've been doing audio in general for about 20 years. Started a recording studio, music, post-production, and that kind of stuff. And today we're going to talk about audio for live games and the challenges that presents and kind of some of the things that you learn along the way and some kind of tips and tricks stuff, some pretty granular actual implementation, things that we've done to fix some of these things. So we'll be talking about Killing Floor 2, which is a wave-based co-op shooter, 6-player, and then Rising Storm 2 Vietnam, which is a 64-player, pretty hardcore military shooter, hyper-realistic. And they're two very different games, but they present a lot of the same challenges. So the first thing is our updates. We do quarterly large content updates. Every 3 months we do quite a bit that we give out free to the community. Generally it consists of new maps. Usually we'll make one in-house, and then we'll often take a community map that we'll kind of polish up and actually purchase from a community member. We have a strong modding community. We'll do new characters. That can be a player character, that can be an enemy, that can be a narrator in a level. New weapons, usually we do about 3 new weapons, and that can be a realistic gun, some crazy thing that's like a chainsaw that shoots saw blades. It can be kind of anything all over the place. Event-based character reskins, that's a huge one that we do. Seasonal event character reskins. We generally do about 1 of those a year. And then new features and modes. This game has been out for, with early access, it's been out for over 4 years. And we don't have a sunset date in mind yet. It kind of depends on player count and sales. And it's still a strong game. So we quarterly put out giant updates. And with that comes new features, new game modes, most of which were not planned when we built the original game. That poses some pretty serious challenges. Voice count and performance is always an issue. We're on PS4, Xbox, and PC for Killing Floor. So general voice count and performance, when you're a co-op game like that and you're adding things, and especially when you're not necessarily using things the way you originally intended to use them. Memory is always an issue. Obviously on consoles, we're chasing that constantly as we add content for, we could be adding content easily for 8 years in this game. So you have to constantly keep an eye on memory on the consoles. Rapid turnaround. We're a really small team who puts out a large amount of content. When I started there 4 years ago, I was the only sound designer. We've since hired 2 more sound designers, but we've also added projects. So it's a small team churning out a large amount of content every 3 months. And my slide put things out of order there. Features outside of original system design. We often come up with things that were not at all planned for. We added PvP to the game after release. We added new game modes. We're adding new weapon types that never existed that don't function within our original design. The community. We'll talk about the community a little more at the end. The community is great, but it definitely presents a challenge. We have a really active fan base, a really active modding base, and they're loud, and so we work with them a lot. So voice counts, new features that use old assets. This one gets us often. It can cause serious trouble. This guy was originally like kind of a mini boss. Then there's only ever supposed to be 1 of them in game. And there's the classic designer lie. Yeah, we'll never have more than 1 of these in the game, we promise. And so we made this really articulate, crazy system for those counter-rotating blades that really pushed up some voice counts that were boss-level voice counts that were okay for 1 character. And then they added 2 of them a couple months after release. And then we had an event where it was like, it'd be really funny if we could do like tiny versions and then really big versions. And then we made them a boss, and then we did waves. We did there are modes in the game now where you fight that's all you do is fight those guys. So that by itself would kill our voice count, which brings you to refactoring on a live game. It freaks people out. It is frightening. My button's not working. It's probably gonna happen. And here's the thing about it. It's okay. It's okay to rip it apart and rip it out because you can really improve the systems. And a lot of times you're going to make a lot smarter decisions after you've seen where you screwed up. So beating a live game gives you an opportunity to do some pretty interesting things when you get to go revisit kind of your legacy systems, your own legacy systems. As long as the player experience is the same or improves, there's an asterisk next to improves. Anything subjective is going to be a discussion on Reddit. A lot. Your version of improved may not be the player's version of improved. Memory and performance, obviously, it's always great because we don't know the sunset date for the game. We're always chasing that and chasing that and chasing that. So it's great. But when you do that and you've created this new system that has better memory usage, better performance, you can look at, wait, maybe I can scale this change across other things, other systems, other assets. So we're always looking to do that. So by, like with that guy, figuring out that we could not have all of the sounds that we were playing on him, that led me to revamp a couple other things too, because I knew we were also going to add waves of them at some point. Critical to live games is good, in my opinion, good middleware, but these games are legacy games. They're older, they're in UE3. There's not a lot of support there for audio at this point. So we use Wwise. If you know me at all or have ever spoken to me, you know I'm a huge Wwise fanboy. I think I've shipped like 15 titles now on Wwise. I just love it. And it's not just the authoring side of it. Sorry, not done talking about Wwise. It's not just the authoring side of it. That's great and it's awesome. The real-time mixing, just their structure and the way it works is fantastic. It's the profiling, especially with the live game. The profiling tools in Wwise are second to none. No one has that. With no programmer help, no input, we can really hone in on any problems that we have. We recently found a bug where we were getting game objects that weren't releasing. The game's been out for 4 years, and it was ticking, and we never knew it until we added a bunch more, going back to that guy, of the same thing, and then all of a sudden we started hitting voice count, and you start to get crazy. Like you're watching voice counts and waiting, watching it for 4 hours to see if the mean goes up. So yeah, the Wwise profiling tools, we could not do what we do without it. And then there's things that I'm going to get into some specific things that I do with Wwise to really help. Sharing first person and third person sounds. That sounds simple, right? Create one sound that you use for both things, like a gunshot is a gunshot. We had some specific challenges, again, with the sheer number of things, weapons that we put out. We're putting out anywhere between 12 to 15 weapons a year on this game. So instead of just sharing sounds, like handling sounds is what we'll go into here. You can create and maintain one Atom Notify set. So our third-person weapon models are always present, even when you're in first person. They're just hidden. So we do all of our Atom Notifies for the reloads on that third-person weapon system. And we have time dilation in our game, so you really have to break them up into tiny pieces. I like to hit any cussive, especially, like anywhere there's a hard hit, you have to really cut up your assets and let them tail over each other. So doing that for multiple weapons, we also have like 30 reloads for every gun. There's elite, half empty. It's a huge amount of content. So I wanted to maintain one Atom Notify set. And what we came up with was setting the position type with a real-time parameter control in Wwise. The cool part is programming. I like to utilize them as smart and as little as possible because they're more likely to do things for you if it's easy and you don't ask for things very often. So all they had to do is give us a number between 0 and 1, whether you were the guy holding the gun or you were not the guy holding the gun. You can control volume and priority with that. It's kind of amazing. So here's, if you could see, we set up an RPC in Wwise. Programmers give you a number. If it's 0, you're the guy holding the gun. If it's 1, you're not the guy holding the gun. And I'm setting the position type with an attenuation value in third person versus second person. Is Chris here? Rickwood is here. This is actually his brainchild. He came up with this. You can also control your voice volume with that same RTPC. If your third person sounds are too loud, you can turn it down here. You can also control priority, which is awesome. So you can say, if it's my gun, you're always going to hear the reloads. If it's other people's guns, it's going to be less likely the further they get away. So a little more work up front to kind of author your content correctly, but then you just copy and paste these values into every weapon handling set, and immediately you've got it. You do one set of animations instead of 2 sets of animations. This is the one that freaks people out. Rendering your weapon reverbs in middleware, and you can do it with anything where you're doing tailored reverbs. We started by baking it in our DAW. Oh man, I moved these around and my slides are all goofy. We're starting from the bottom. Rendered effects have 0 CPU cost. So in Wwise, or in some other middleware too, you can click a render button. You can have the plugin built into the tool, render that at runtime, and spit it out into the game. What's really cool is the manual management of your original versus process files is totally negated. It no longer exists. You have one sound. You have gunshot sound, sounds great, it's dry, and then you go tailor those reverbs in your middleware. So you're not managing. We used to have to spit out every variation of every gun with every reverb type that we wanted. Because with guns, you can't really use just kind of the normal in-game reverb. You want to really tailor that. So that cut down the number of files that we're managing by like a factor. Adjustments to overall processing takes minutes now instead of days and hours. If you're like, man, I really hate that small room reverb, you don't have to go in and redo it for 50 guns. You can change the plugin, generate, and you've got your new reverbs. Real-time tweaking. So you turn off rendered when you're designing this weapon because you don't care, you're in a dev mode, you're on a PC. So you can totally tweak all of these things, all your weapon reverbs, as you're playing the game until they're totally dialed in. Click the render button, no CPU cost, no management of files. This one, like I said, it freaks people out a little bit because you're kind of locked into the plugins within whatever middleware you're using. But we also use an ecosystem to kind of bolster this for big outdoor spaces where we check cardinal direction and play a sound based on speed of sound and from the position where the echo would come from. So I'll show you a little. Wow, I really messed this one up here. This is not about the amazingness of the sounds, it's more about the process. But you can see how this works with a small room. Kind of go over here. Now you're going to hear the echo in here also, but the majority sound is the reverb. And again, this allows us to just set up this room and run around with any gun and dial it in very quickly without ever touching our source files or our DAW. So a quick little rundown on how we do this, and then you can kind of see it in action, how quick and easy it is. So here we've got our reverb setups, right? Our presets over here. So I've created a new mountain reverb for a gun. We added a mountain level. We never had it before. Now, normally, again, you would have to go back to how many weapons and redo this. You don't. So we create our new preset. Great, that's the best mountain reverb ever. And then go in here. I'm going to go grab one of my random containers that are labeled city, large room, medium room, small room. I'm going to copy and paste that, rename it mountain, change the plugin, and then just assign that in the switch container. And we have a full weapon set done for a weapon in like a minute. Again, with the rapid turnaround, it's kind of crucial for us. Seasonal event reskin challenges. These are the big ones. These are rough. It's a complete overhaul of character sounds. Now, we don't do these quarterly. Like, so we do these about once a year. And all the animations are shared. So they're just changing the character model. It's not like we're getting new animation sets that we can really tailor things and get into it with. But they're massive reskins. So like this guy, he's a clot. He's like our fodder enemy in the game. He turns into a clown for one of our events. That is not gonna work if you use the same sounds. Our siren, she's kind of squeaky. She's got like metal bars and it squeaks when she walks, and she has like a sonic blast attack. She becomes an armless bearded lady for the summer sideshow, who we came up with an operatic thing instead of the Sonic attack. But these are massive changes. And we had shared animation, so we're trying to figure out what's the easy way to do this. And we came up with some really bad ideas that involved a lot of code. And then we came up with some really simple ideas. And it was driven by a global game state. Quite literally, the programmer, again, this took the entire programming thing took 5 minutes. He said, oh, what do you want me to do? Send a thing to Wise that says fall, summer, spring, and it was done. We never talked about it again. Simple switch containers in Wise, minimum code requirements. I really should not have reordered those right before I walked in here. Zero dependencies, which is really great. We don't have to wait for the art to come online. We don't have to wait for anybody because it's using the same atom sets, same atom notifies. We can just start creating our content early from the concept art. And no, again, it's a little more upfront work with the designing because you're using the same atom notifies. So you might want to tweak things, maybe use some offsets, but it allows us to really get ahead of things. We can work on these months and months in advance, far before the art comes online. So the physicality of how I'm doing it, set up a switch container, very simple, very straightforward. For an enemy, like his aggro yell here, I've got a random container for each event. It's kind of like the weapon reverb stuff. I just assign it within the switch to that. You can control anything you want, pitch, offset, volume, to tailor these per character. And it's kind of set it and forget it. So here's our normal plot. And they become pigs. One last one to send out. So that became very easy, and we did that, and we had those done months before the pig model came in. So the day the pig model came in and we turned it on, it was like magic to the studio. They were like, oh my God, it's a pig. So it's pretty great. This is more mixed evaluation in real-world situations. This is a challenge with Rising Storm. Rising Storm, a 64-person multiplayer game with a team size, I think at its peak was probably about 15 people total. And we're very part-time. We co-developed this with another company, with Antimatter Games, and they're in the UK. But they don't have an audio person, so we picked up audio, and we would kind of do it as we could around our other projects. Because of the small team size, trying to do things, big changes. We just revamped our occlusion system this year. Again, the game's been out for years, and we completely revamped it with that refactor. We came up with a much better solution that works better, improved it, the players love it, but it's really scary to let that out in the wild when you cannot test with 64 people. Like that, I mean, that is a physical impossibility for this project. We cannot get 16 people. So what we did was we convinced a programmer to figure out how to bypass our cheat system. And we started just replacing the local audio folder and play online with everybody. We do some closed betas and things like that, but even then, you can't, you don't want to send things out that are broken. There's no iteration time to come back and forth. So it's amazing. We can sit there and play with our changes, our local changes, and we can even profile, and we can real-time mix while playing with people. We could have, we can go out and grab 100 different servers full of people doing things that you should not be doing, and that we would never expect them to do, and really see what's going on and how bad it is. But it's been invaluable, and I don't know why we didn't think of it like years ago. It was the simplest solution to that. Obviously, you can't do that on consoles, but with a PC game, it's really useful. Memory management. We're constantly chasing memory, always chasing memory because of the consoles and the constant addition of content. So compression types, Vorbis versus PCM versus ADPCM, you got to make some decisions. CPU usage with Vorbis can get a little rough. You can mix and match, though. We've become a big fan of that. And then throwbacks to early console techniques. So when I started, we were all like PS2, Wii, DS. It was a very different world. Like on the Wii, you would have about 3.5 megs, maybe, if you were really nice to somebody, of static memory, and 4 streams that disks, and like the disk head seek time was like up to 1/4 of a second or something crazy like that. You had to worry about when you crossfaded things because you could only stream 4 files. I was talking to another sound designer yesterday about this. This is a bit of a lost art, I feel like, right now. Everyone got kind of spoiled with this new generation of consoles and with PC games. And if it fits when you ship it, it's all cool, everything's great. This has presented a new challenge for us because we don't know when the content pipeline stops. Like, when do we stop adding things? And there's not a lot of chance to dynamically load a lot of things in our games because of how many weapons you can have and because of how many players. You just kind of have to load it all. The only thing we dynamically load is level sounds. Variation limiting. This is another thing that's a simple solution to a problem. If you can create, it's a little more work on the authoring side. If you can create 2 layers to your sound, even just 2 layers to your sound, and randomize those, now you have a factor of variations. Now you have to make sure they play nice together in any possible way, but instead of having 30 variations of a gunshot, you can have 2 layers of 5 sounds each, and now you've got more variation, more exciting variation, with far, far less asset. Latency choices. When is pre-caching streaming files worth it? So we have probably 9,000-ish right now VL files in the game. And if they all were pre-cached at all, we would hit our memory budget very quickly. And we're always adding more and more and more. That's a huge thing. We probably add somewhere between now 2,000 and 3,000 lines a year to the game. Pre-caching is only important if you really need something to play at that second, right? So I see that a lot. You see a lot of just kind of blanket pushing of pre-caching because it sounds like a good idea. Like, yeah, I want to pre-cache that, so it's going to play right away. There are very few things where you actually need to pre-cache it because if you're going to have a 50 millisecond delay on a VO line that's chatter, it doesn't matter. So just being judicious about things in general. In the throwback, that goes to the console techniques, like really figuring out your sample rate assessment. What's the frequency I need to hear for real with this sound? And then cut your sample rate down until you don't, you can get your size down and not notice an audible difference. Wise does it by itself now. You can automatically do it. I don't trust that. I still do it manually. Like, I just use an EQ and shelve it until I'm comfortable and then do it. Because I feel like sometimes it'll cut it down a little too low where you can start to notice it. On to the community. The community. We have rabid fans, and we allow a lot of modding, and so things can get a little crazy. And the community is the absolute best source of information, 100% for you. They're also the absolute worst source of information. You get that thing where people pile onto the negative and they don't really pile onto the positive. Or you get 5 people piling onto a negative and it turns into a 500 post thread, which garners the attention of your community manager. And then you have to actually look at it and figure out how many people really care about this. So a good relationship with your community manager is great. They can help sort through that. But learning to assess feedback. I had never worked on a game with a community like this until I came to Tripwire. And it took me a couple years to really figure this out. To really assess feedback, really look at it. Do they have a point? Maybe they're not articulate in speaking in your terms on how to make that point, or they're swearing at you, but they may have a really good point. So you really have to learn to kind of filter through those things. How to action on it. You don't want to knee-jerk because somebody doesn't like something. We've gone around and around with the grenade ear ringing thing. Like, we turn it up, we turn it down, it's better. And finally, I just put a slider in for it that people could, or I put it in an init file where the PC gamers can just do whatever they want with it. And then they stop talking about it. How to ignore feedback. That's a hard one. There are times when it's just not right, but you can see this growing list behind it, this growing wave and momentum. And also, your friends, your developer friends, the people you work with. Anyone can find any Reddit post about your game to bolster their opinion. So you do have to watch out for that. But in general, the community has just been fantastic. Like I said, we gave all the tools out. I finally got Audiokinetic to start giving away licenses to modders. I put the full project up, full documentation for how I do every single thing in KF2. And we released it all out into the wild. And it's a little scary because they see how the sausage is made. You get some pretty interesting posts. They're like, "You're so lazy. You reused that sound 4 times in this game." But it's been great overall. People are really digging into it, and we're getting more and more valid feedback now because I think they feel like they have some ownership. They have some ownership with the process. And that's the cool part, is getting them to engage and feel ownership. Now, the flip side of that is I also end up, you have to kind of put the brakes on things sometimes because you end up just being like a you're teaching how to use Wwise and how to make games. But overall, it's good. But yeah, thick skin, the thick skin story is when I first started, this is one where like the owners had to sit me down and say, it's okay. We were in early access, and I had replaced the 9mm pistol sound in the game. And there was a petition online to have me fired from my job for replacing the 9mm sound. So, yeah, you've got to kind of just take it all in. That's about it. If anyone has any questions or anything, thanks.
Hi, great talk.
Thank you.
A question about the RTPCs that you're handling, the third person and first person and third person stuff. Since you're going to be using those RTPCs in multiple like pieces of content, how are you managing that if you wanted to make a change on like volume or like across multiple parts of content and you're using RTPCs? Are there any ways that you're handling those curves for multiple pieces of content?
Yeah, so each one of those curves is actually, each one of those RTPC curves, it depends where you put it in the hierarchy, right? Where in the mix hierarchy you put it. You can put it on any individual asset, copy and paste it, and change it to however you want. Same with the reverbs. You can do a shared set or you can do a custom one. So you can tailor it per weapon, per thing, whatever, per sound if you want. It just depends where in that hierarchy you put it.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Hey, how's it going? Thank you. I work at Bungie with Destiny, so this is a lot of similar crossovers with this sort of environment. Yeah, I was wondering if you have any techniques that you have developed for managing the density of encounters in the mix with, like, your boss example. You built it to be a set piece, and then it becomes a wave encounter. Like, aside from going back to refactor that boss, have you implemented systemic things in the structure of your projects to kind of handle stuff like that better?
You can do some creative stuff with busing based on distance. You can get a distance RTPC. I use that a lot, where I'll use the distance to the set piece or the thing that you're encountering to determine volume. HDR, I don't know if you've messed with the HDR stuff, but I find it like beyond frustrating. I'm old school. I use ducking and sidechaining, but I definitely use distance and priority quite a bit. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Hello.
Hello.
Couple quick questions. I'll ask them at the same time. What was the issue with the Flesh Pound voicing? And also, how did you guys get Gary Busey as badass Santa?
Okay, the Gary Busey one, we could do a whole talk on that. It was the most amazing week ever. You're saying what were the problems with it?
With the Flesh Pound voicing, yeah.
So he had, like, those spinning blades were built with an unbelievable amount of layers, let's put it that way. That kind of predated me a little bit, and then we tried to do it again, and then I made it worse with more layers. Those guys were putting out like easily like 30 voices at a time, and it was, so it was kind of again, when I say legacy systems, I often mean your own legacy systems too. Like, you sometimes hate yourself a year later. But yeah, it was just straight up too many voices. There's a lot of layers that were fading over each other with tails, and it just went sideways quickly. How do we get Gary Busey? They trusted me a lot to be really weird. So we had gotten Claudia Black first as Mrs. Foster, and because I'm a super Farscape nerd, and so I just wanted to. And that sold really well, and people really liked it. So we started talking about Santa, and if you've seen the model of him, he's like that big, crazy guy. So I actually tried to get Jesse Ventura first, because I thought that would have been great, but he was put off a bit by playing Santa, apparently, that kills things with a shovel. So second idea was Gary Busey, and he was enthusiastic about it. He was very interesting to work with. You kind of get whatever Busey gives you. You get one take, and it may not be anything related to what is on the page. But we knew what we were getting into with it. We knew we were just going for crazy Busey, and so we just asked.
Perfect.
He's into it.
That's awesome.
4 days of 4-hour days with Gary Busey.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Hey man, cool talk. Thank you for your talk. I I had a question about the pre-caching. What would you consider a good sound to pre-cache?
So it totally depends. If you have something gameplay related that you know you need to happen right away, maybe if, like, say you're streaming exertions or something, which sounds really stupid, but sometimes you have to do things like that with a lot of characters. Those things you want to play immediately,
Yep.
and instead of putting the whole asset in, maybe you're going to do a small pre-cache of like a 75 millisecond pre-cache, just so that people get that immediate feedback, right? When you push a button, like lagging sounds when you push a button, if it's a feedback sound, is just the death of it, because it makes the game feel like it's controlling poorly. And
No,
that's-
I'm having an issue in my game right now where everything is, all the melee hits and things are not really syncing, and I notice it, so it
Are
feels
you,
weird.
and you're streaming?
And we're streaming. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's server versus client.
And we can talk
stuff.
about it after. We've got
That'll
a
be great.
lot. I'll talk to you in depth about that. We have a lot of things like that with which
Yeah.
things we play client side, which things we don't.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
would be
that's
great.
that's a longer conversation.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Cool. Well, thank you.